So I'm sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see.
Yes.
You can see, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I think last we talked about selectors. So regarding class selectors ID, etc. And we understood that class selector is the most frequently used way of defining CSS. And we also discussed about external CSS is the go-to approach out of all other approaches. So from takeaways was using class selector at the same time. Using external CSS is the right approach for CSS for all our I mean, going forward, we'll be using that approaches. Now, to talk about specific to JavaScript, so we'll just understand with one simple example of calculator. So simple logics. How do we write in JavaScript? So our core idea is we have built our application, but now we need to understand how to get it working. So in our previous class, we understood that to give it a nice, HTML, with using HTML, we defined the buttons. Then using CSS, we brought it a nice look to it. But how to actually bring business logic? It's like now we have to do some addition, multiplication, division, etc. So this is nothing but the logic part. So how do we ensure that we use JavaScript? So before jumping there, so we'll just understand simple uh, topics about JavaScript. And it's the same how we have used CSS, similar to it itself. Let me take simple example first. Okay. So let's see output. So all these basic examples, we have to run it from index file. So we had to always come here. So if not,
Mm.
ideally, every other applications, we can run directly from Visual Studio Code itself. So there was a basic thing as such. We used both HTML, CSS tags, and all we did was basic tags, etc. Okay. So here the key part was we used. In order to understand JavaScript, what I was doing is I'm just using one single button called calculate, and I'm taking two different variables and doing a basic sum like a plus b equal to the output. So here static, when I say the moment I click calculate, we already defined which two values to calculate. Then we are expecting to print the output. So basically we are using a simple calculator to do addition of two numbers. So if to achieve such a functionality, now on clicking calculate, it shows us the values of values are sum of values are 3. So here it got hidden, and the moment we click on a press event, we are displaying the output. So these are called as a static events and dynamic events. See, I'm just repeating. So previously we were seeing just static elements. Static elements, when we say they always appear on the screen. So now if you see week one, the bookmarks, heading, these all appear always. And at the same time, see, to appear them in a more lucrative way, we were using the so-called CSS, and these different text colors, etc. were appearing. But how to ensure that, see, the moment you fill a form, see, you submit it, it has to go to some other page and then it displays some output, or it has to redirect you to with successful transaction, etc. So these all are like you're doing some action, right? Either submitting or you're pressing an event or you're doing some action. So how to inform the server that this action has been happened and we need to fetch a fresh result? So all these activities are being done using JavaScript. Clear? So when do we use JavaScript is any click action or any event if you want to have to trigger it, then JavaScript is the go-to place to inform server that there's a change in the UI and we need to fetch these particular results. So if we have a real-time data in the database, so JavaScript helps us a key role in instructing the database to send the right information to the user. So this is how the basic JavaScript works. So let's see how the static, example in this case works in this case. So right now, just a button called calculate. So to define JavaScript, once again, like initially how we define, we have a HTML and we'll have a body. So in this case, you can ignore all this stuff and can concentrate only on this particular paragraph. So define comments, we define it this way for HTML. So simple addition static function. Okay. So now we are talking about a simple static function. Nothing but we'll use a simple button, and we are using on click of that button we wanted to achieve addition of two numbers. So in this case, rest of all are just paragraph tags, h1 tags. So this is pretty much HTML CSS which we learned itself. So here if you see, we have given a title called let's practice JavaScript, and I just defined one button. So for the button, I have given a name called calculate, and I have given a event called on click. For every property like control in this case, but it is a button, so you can have a table control or you can have a drop down. So every control will have actions. So in case of a drop down, you have to select one of them, right? In case of a radio button, you have to click, or if it is a checkbox, you have to tick mark it. So similarly for a button, it is a click event. So such an actions we call it as events in JavaScript. Okay. So in this case, button will have on click. So these events are very everywhere. We'll find it in the API. So for which kind of control, what kind of events are available. So in this case, what I was doing is on click. I have written a function. So if we have a common basis, we call it as a function. So in this case, sum is a function, and I have defined a paragraph to display my output. And in this case, I have given an ID. So uniquely to identify where to the output of this function, where I have to place it. So for this, I have defined ID called ID add. Okay. So what we are trying to do is we'll define all the logic in our sum function, and the output will try to display in this particular paragraph location. So this is just a simple one-line code. So
Be
how do
like
we?
using paragraph ID. I'm sorry. Should we always use the paragraph ID for placing the ID?
Not exactly. So you can use any location. See, if you wanted to use, if you want to display it in an input tag, so you can pretty much use any tag. So
Okay, go. Okay.
all we need is we need to specify we have to pass an instruction stating where we have to display the output.
Mhm. Got it.
So that is a clear. Now in this case, I can use a value, and we can use even ID for this as well. Okay, output. So either anyway, so all we need to say is we have to whichever control we have to set an ID. So idea is we need to tell instruction where that output has to be displayed. So if you write a function, still it doesn't display because the output exists in the browser window, but it doesn't know when to display and where to display. So we have to always pass the instruction. So now, so for now, how to define functions in JavaScript. So JavaScript is all about functions. So same way how we have defined CSS. Again, there are like two ways of defining JavaScript. Either in the head section or at the after end of the body or anywhere you can define the script functions. So the advantage of defining script function on the top, like we have seen previously also, the whole bootstrap UFI controls etc. See, if you have to define a framework without the libraries, you cannot actually run your application, right? You need the controls etc. So it's a good practice to always define script tag on the head part, because once libraries are loaded, your application will not wait for any further libraries to load. Okay, so that I'll park it for a later part. I'll explain in detail about it. But for a basic function, how do we define this? So you have to use script tag. Style tag is meant for CSS. Script tag is meant for JavaScript. So now if here I have defined simple JavaScript function and script tag, and now we are defining a function called sum. So the syntax would be this way. So function, start with the function, then give any name. So whatever name you want to give, and everything it has to start and open with this open braces. And you have to give a curly brace, and it should always end with a semicolon. So this is the syntax of a function. If you define it this way, then system will understand, okay, there's a logic involved for this particular condition, and whatever it's executed, so after complete execution it flows to the next function. So suppose if you have defined multiple functions, so it will always from like again top down approach. So every function it executes and it has the value available. So whenever you invoke it, so it gives us the output of it. So if you ask a function sum1, sum2, sum3, etc. So if you ask this function, it will return the output. So here what we have done is there are like some keywords are there where is default for defining any operator. So in this case, uh, you need not define whether it is integer or whether it is text or anything. Any variable in JavaScript, all we have to use is var. If you say var equal to a equal to 1, then it will take it as a number. And if you say it as some within quotes, if you give, suppose in this case if I give it as var c equal to some text this way, if I given, so this will consider this as directly as a string. So in this case, var can be used for any data type in JavaScript. That's the advantage. So you need not to actually specify whether it is integer or whether it is. So in specific programming language, you will have different, initialization for initializing a variable. You will have different literals. So in this case, var is the only keyword we use. You can use either var or let. So there's a key difference between var and let, but that I'll explain later. But for the case of understanding, all if you want to define a string, you have to make sure that you are putting in a quotes. So if you do not put it in quotes, if suppose if I give it as this way, as 1 2 3, now this case it will consider 1 2 3 as a string. It doesn't consider it as a number. Likewise, if you define it this way, it consider it as a number. So that's how whether it is a string or whether it is a number is differentiated in JavaScript, right? So this is about. So to comment in a function, you can use two slashes. So now var, once again I am trying to display an output. So var c equal to a plus b. So just we'll define a plus b. Then here again one more important point to understand is single equal to refers to assignment. Like if one value you have, we are just assigning to a variable. So this value we are setting it. So likewise, if you use anytime a double equal to 1, that means it's comparison operator. Comparison, when I say if now we use it this way. Now in this case, a has a value 1, right? And similarly, if b has a value also 1, now how I can use is, so if a equal to b, I can check if a equal to b condition this way. So this returns as output as true. If you see, this double equal to says that whether a and b has the same value or not. So we are asking it this way. So single equal to, if you use, it is like you're loading this particular alphabet or variable with the value on the left side. So right side value will be loaded onto the left side variable. So this is how we do. If it is double equal, it is like comparison. If a and b are having same values or not. There is one more operator called triple equal to. This is very important for understanding in JavaScript. So if you use this way, it strictly checks the data type as well. So like previous example, how we have defined 1 2 3. Now if I have a as 1 2 3, and in the b if I give it as a string 1 2 3, right? So both looks the same, 1 2 3. The system, if you give it a equal to b, it still says as true. Because it checks only if a and b are, it will compare both are same or not, it will just compare. It will not check whether it has same data, because for both the cases we used var itself. So how does system know? You're getting right. So in this case, if we use triple equal to, it strictly checks for the data type. So in this case it will says as false, because boss, this is in quotes, so this is a string and this is though both look 1 2 3, they are not the same. So it clearly tells you whether it is, when the both values are, it will compare along with the data type. So this is very important point to understand, because if you do a slight mistake, the whole if you use instead of this as a comparison, your b value will be assigned to a and your whole logic will be collapsed. Okay, so there will be cases conditions are used. If a equal to b, maybe you are saying you allowed to log into the screen. Okay, suppose if you are using a condition, so here it defines your b value will be assigned to a. It's not a comparison operator. So when to use comparison operator, when to use assignment operator, we need to understand. Clear? So we're just understanding when to use single equal to, when to use double equal to, when to use triple equal to. Okay. Now to assign it to, so now we have defined the simple function. Okay. Now how do we assign it to the screen? Now we have defined a paragraph tag and we have given ID, right? So there is like default browser events are there. So any position we have either by element ID or by, you know, uh, there are like different ways by which by page also we can set. So different ways we can set. So here document dot get element by ID, nothing but it will says by ID we are setting it, and which ID, what is the ID? So that is ID is or add in this case. This case if you see we had an ID as add. So ID as add we have defined. So what we are saying is, and within inner HTML, so within the HTML itself, there is an ID called ID add. So just place this output there. So what we are saying, what to place the output, this is how we are saying the sum of values. Okay, sum of values we are saying, and output. See this in this case, plus is used in two ways. So in this case, plus is used as uh, to add uh, two values, right? So in this case, it is used as a concatenation operator.
Okay.
If you see, this is a string and you are concatenating with the C value,
Mm.
right? So our output, what we are saying is this, in this case, it is a string and you're using this way, then it uses it as a concatenating operator. Okay. So here plus has multiple significance, just like how we had equal to. So whenever the values you are using it, so according to the values it situation, uh, JavaScript automatically it interprets whether this is a, had to use concatenation or whether it has to use addition. And two numbers are given, it will do some of those values. When you give a string and and a number, then it will try to concatenate. So in this case as well, we can try it out multiple ways. Now just see the output now. If you see the output, whenever we, so in this case all we built is a calculate button and a sum. Now whenever we click on it, it will do the values. So let's change some numbers and see whether it is working or not. So 123 I have defined, and then so it says as 125. So this is how we built static functions. Clear? So key thing what we are learning is we have for any functions if we want to write, we have to give as a script tag, and function syntax should be some function followed by name of the function, and then whenever it is ending you have to define with a semicolon, and whatever you write inside would be the logic part. So this is how any basic logics will do. So let's make it more uh, clear to our example. So now in this case, it's now we understood functions concept. So how do we add two numbers? So in the calculator example, we actually need some, people can change multiple values, and then we have to do it. So in this case, we are giving a screen flow. Now in this case, we did not have any screen. Okay, we had a button. Now in this case, the same function. Now I'm giving user to select whatever value he wanted to have. So automatically immediately we are getting the output. So this became our universal function. So if I give some text or random function as well, so it fails to understand. So we can define some error handling as well. And so it became a reusable code. So now if you use this particular sum function anywhere, it will always perform the activity of addition of two numbers. So this function, once you write, you can reuse it in any program. So not only this application, anywhere you can use it. So that's the advantage JavaScript. So if you write a logic once, it can be used anytime, any place we can reuse it. So now how do we build, now we have defined initially static. Now here we are giving option for user to enter whatever values they want, and we are able to achieve the functionality of addition. So in here, to get this way, all we have to do is define two input functions. So let's see. So here, if you see, to achieve that, all we defined is input tag. Okay, and we have given two input tags with two IDs, value 1, value 2. And this one more function we had defined. Previously we had defined as sum. Now we have defined a function called calculator. And to print the output, we are saying one more paragraph as ID total. Clear it? So now instead of static values, we are defining two input tags. So for this, how do we have a function is in order to define a function, what we were doing is we had one script tag. Now I added within the head one more script tag called calculator, function calculator. And like the same way how we have defined the syntax, so we have variable 1 and variable 2, two variables. So in this case we have to get the value from the screen, right? So what we are saying is previously we were setting the value, now we are getting the value. So document.get element by id field value 1. So what are value 1 dot value? So in our case, if you see, for input tag has a property called value. Okay, whatever we are entering it, it is stored in the value property this way. So by default, if you don't define, it will be empty. And if you wanted to, or by default, some value, if you want to set always 1, 2, 3, we can set this way as well. So default always it comes with some value. Or if you leave it anything blank, it will come as blank. Sorry. So if we, in this case, if we reload this, we have, if we want to always set it to some default value, we can set it display values. So always it comes with these values. So if we do not set any value, or if you don't define anything, by default it will come as empty. So if you see, it will be empty. So we are defining two input values, and what we are saying is whatever value user enters there, fetch from these particular IDs. So we are defining for this field, there is a unique ID called value 1. For this field, there is a unique value called value 2. So fetch value 1 value, fetch value 2 value. So we are saying it, we are passing an instruction to it. So how do we pass it? So this is how. So get element by ID, document.get element by ID, value 1 dot value and value 2 dot value. So whichever the control you have, all you need to provide is the ID, unique ID. So always we make sure that you define unique IDs. So if you're having multiple controls, we should not define same ID for another control. So you know, passing instruction to compiler, it has to be clear and you know, accurate. So if you have two different controls, suppose what happens if I define for this as well value 1, or if ID I had ID. So if I define ID to this as well, so system doesn't understand which value to, you know, process as such. So you can get incorrect results, etc. So always having unique and different IDs for each control is key in JavaScript.
And do we need to initialize this value?
Not necessary. So it's up to you. See, in this case, use case, it doesn't make you know, necessary. So for example, you have a transaction ID. Assume that for each one who is doing this particular transaction, you have an ID. What you have to do, you have to initialize it the value with transaction ID whenever you're logging in, right? So in certain places when you need it to initialize it, we can initialize it. In this case, it doesn't make sense because for a calculator application, nobody, you know, use some default values. So user can will enter start with their own values. Whatever they want to do the activity, they'll do it. So it's up to us. If you want to initialize, we can initialize as well. Clear? So we're trying to understand about more about functions here. So this is how JavaScript will be used. Now we can extend this to, now we used it some function, right? So here one more thing I missed to mention. So if you choose, I have used a keyword called parseInt. So this is where the value actually it will understand. There are like we have some inbuilt functions as well. So it checks whether this value is integer or not. So if you search with this one, let's try with this way. So like I said, we'll give it in a quotes. Okay, and one I'm giving in quotes and one I'm giving it this way. So it says not a number. NaN means not a number. So one of the field which we entered is not a number. So these kind of type checks are done when we use here parseInt is check whether this value is integer or not. We are just adding a command called check whether this value is integer or not. So that's why when we enter any number or any string, because calculator application always we have to ensure that it should be a number. As our variable, it holds any value, we are to ensure that it has only integer value, we have to always do a you know, check of whether it is a parse string or parse you know, integer, etc. So these commands allow us to do type checking. So here in this case, previously we did not have any type check, etc. Now here for this input field, we are trying to put one check. So if I define minus values also, it will pretty much work fine. but as long as it is not, it's a number, our program will always accept it. So that's how we use this type of conversions as well. So parseInt will always check whether the value is integer or not, right? So here now we can extend this to for similarly like how we have done addition. We can do multiplication, division, etc., and we can define four functions. So now these functions, whenever you want to do any addition or any multiplication, straight away you can, all you can do is use these particular functions. But how have we defined it? So how do we reuse it? So we have placing everything in the head tag. It's not easily carryable, right? So what we do is, instead of placing on the head, similarly we'll use it external JavaScript files. So instead of placing in the code, what we can do is we can place them outside. So the same example, in this case, what I do is I'll use a simple way. So previously in this example, if you see CSS or JavaScript, everything are added in the same page itself. So HTML scripts as well as CSS, everything are in the head part itself. Now in our case, for CSS, I'll just use link tag, and you can say href, so the location of the file, and it should end with .css. If it is HTML, we'll say .html. If it is CSS, we'll say .css. If it is JavaScript, we'll say .js. So these extensions are very much important. Only then compiler will understand whether it is a CSS file or whether it is a JavaScript file. So instead of defining in the same page, all I am defining is script tag, and in this case for JavaScript, we'll say source, src source. So if you see code.js, it is nothing but straight away function one called sum, function two called calculate. The same code, I just I have cut this part, and in the same script tag also you can place multiple functions. You need not define separate script function. So we can always place multiple functions. All we need is separator called semicolon. Previously in CS also we had a separator called semicolon, and we saw that we can define multiple style tags within the control. So for one control, if you want to do multiple CSS, we can do. Similarly, for multiple functions, if you want to write, we can write in the same script tag as well. So now we just place those both script tags here, in this case, two functions. So this we call it as function one and function two. So both functions, simply we can place it this way. So let's see if it differs anything as such. The same function now, I had defined code.js. So this is the file, and the style part I have defined in here. So if you see this file as well, so the files, etc. So all the CSS what are internally we defined, now I defined it in separate file, calculator example, etc. All the CSS. So advantage is, we can, if you want to carry this particular, reuse this particular codes or JavaScript, all we have to do is we have to use this particular code.js in separate project. So for large applications, these all JavaScript breakdown of logics will be really useful. So we can carry our code once we have written, we can always reuse it for a number of use cases. Whenever there's a scenario where you have to deal with sum of two functions or multiplying, etc. So in this case, this is an example. There could be some other logic which you have built upon, so which can be reusable. So by using external files, it gives a flexibility to carry this particular JavaScript to anywhere, and it will be very much easy, right? So external JS, if I run, if you see, there is no change in this. Think something got changed. Let's check with code. So we had this external JS. Open it, check. So in this case, code.js, we have defined it, and then we had yes, value one, value two, and on click of calculator we have it. Correct. Everything is correct. So here it's failing to do the desired output. So how do we know whether what exactly error? So in this case, what we can do is we can inspect the particular control. So in this case, I'm doing right click it, and then you can select Control Shift I. So in this case, our logic, maybe what are wrong it happened. We are not sure what exactly happened. Now what we can do is when we click on it, it will come to you have to select the console tab. So it will tell you where exactly to refer. So it says at line number 32 there is an issue. Okay, calculator is not defined. So you can click on this and it will take you to the code. Okay, so it says calculator is not defined in that particular application on click. So we can go to that particular code.js file and we can refer to it. So let me open with notepad. Okay, so here I have defined some other text as well. Now let's see if it works. So in this case it works because I defined some afterwards for as a notes I have written some notes as such. So because of that it failed in executing of the line of code. So if there is an flow of execution in the code snippet, if anything fails, so in this case if there is see top to bottom, though this function successfully executed, if there is some random text or any snippet which is out there, so the code can break. So in this case what it happened is the code after execution of all the function calculate function, it failed to execute some other instructions at the bottom. So it ended up with an error. So that's what it's throwing. So in order to check such an issues, etc., so anytime for troubleshooting, always we'll use the inspect option, or you can use ftol as a shortcut as well, and you can check in the console tab. So this is step number one of debugging. So anywhere whenever we have to debug we have to use Chrome debugger tools itself for because everything is running output in the browser. So we'll use Chrome itself. We'll know what exactly the issue is. So now we understood example. So now we can extend this to any application. So to better understand HTML, CSS, etc., what we'll try to do is we can take an example of any bill. If you have any telephone bill or any bill, so the same logics, simple logics, we can use it to build upon. So in this case, if you see, I have taken an idea postpaid bill in this case. So if you see the structure here, so basic calculations etc are involved. So same addition how we have done. Further as a use case, if you want to extend, you can take any of your any bill, be it electricity bill or any postpaid bill etc. So if you see, you can define your text field name etc address etc using your HTML tags, and similarly you can use some image. Sorry. So and to calculate the amount, we can give it a different breakup of our events like bill amount, tax, how much has been the service tax, etc. And you can calculate all these things. So basic some example can have different applications. Now in this case, we can use the same function to calculate a number of events. So this case, you can build your own application digital form of your bill as an invoice. So any email template you can prepare, and you can reuse your code for a number of times, right? So this is one example. So here all we used is basic tags, HTML tags, and then you had some image tags, so two image tags. To have a separation, you can use CSS. So CSS, we're using it, you can give a box. So box we have seen for the calculator how to give a border, etc. So two boxes you can give it in a shape of it, then you'll get this box. And if you use a table control, or you can use box as well to achieve this particular table kind of structure. So these are the basic examples. So similarly, one more example kind of, you can, if you are picking up any gas or anything, so here also anything, so some of the what is the invoice etc, when to deliver etc. So all any of these invoices, where are you see invoices, all these involve like basic sum operations itself, so nothing much. So what we do is we'll have a template and dynamically we have to generate the invoice. So every time whenever price of the gas etc changes, so do you rechange it, they have to dynamically just change the values of it, what values, what is the tax, what's the current price etc, your invoice will be automatically generated. So this is how our skills of basic HTML CSS, using it we can design any builds, and all you have to do is use some CSS to define the fixed elements, and for the changing one we have to use a JavaScript to achieve this particular fields of what is the cost of each unit etc. Clear? So this is one exercise which we can do to understand better utilize this part. Any bill you can take and you can just use this particular scenario. So with this we have covered the basics of HTML JavaScript. Now I think going forward we'll always talk about UFI, and let's understand now. Once again we'll go back to our old one application where how these all principles are used in our UFI framework, right? Yeah, one more addition to it. So for JavaScript it's not so easy like how I have shown it. Okay, uh, the classes, like how we are defining it, JavaScript is all based on functions. So inbuilt functions, the how many ever we practice it, will have that much of flexibility. So for hacker ranker is one place. Okay, there is one 30 days code challenge. Okay, so you can parallelly practice these areas as well. So this 30 days of code challenge, it covers basic concepts. So this is free to, we can sign it up, and once you sign up, log into it, I can just show you. So there is a 30 days code of challenge. Every day one will be unlocked. Okay, so it gives you basic because for us JavaScript is key and everything. You can select. Uh, so in this case example, if you say day 0, they say hello world. So they give you instructions, and these are called online editors. And always any, if you're going for any interview nowadays, all our interviews are happening on the online itself. So they ask you to clear the online assessment etc. So in those cases also you have to use these online editors. So it will be twin way, it will give you familiarity. See, all UFA or any web development, online code editors, if you understand it, then you can attempt or give online evaluation. If they are doing online JavaScript skills as evaluation etc., since you should be used to this particular online editors. So HackerRank or etc. will give you a playground. Uh, so there is a slight change. See, in this case we have an notepad etc. We can write the functions etc. But that's not the case with online editors, right? So if you see here, so just to run a simple hello world program, they use a function. Now the so how we have used it same. So process data, they have given some function and they are asking to write us the code here. So all we can do is we use console.log. Console.log is the way. Now any error, how we are using is we are using the console, right? So console is the place where we can run, we can check or test anything. So here if you say, these are test playground actually. If you say for JavaScript functions anything, directly we don't code. What we do is we test it here, what exactly the value could be. So console.log allows us to place some content in this temporary location. So console is an area and it has a log. It keeps all the track of all the what is error which has happened. Previously we have seen there's a error in line number 32 etc. So that is a log. So this is all a temporary place. The moment you close the browser, everything will be gone, right? So we can, in order to place a content here, we can use console.log as a command. And here if you say any command if you give, so it just prints the output. So this is a simple editor you can consider as a JavaScript editor, this particular console. So we'll see a number of use cases how we'll use this particular console for our testing of or debugging various functions etc. in UFI framework. Okay, so this is how we'll use to print any output in a console. Now same thing, previous in editors what we do is every time, so we can use this console.log to print output to the screen. So if you run this code, it will say so it says sample test is failed, and all it says is you have to print welcome to 30 days of code and then hello world. In this way we have to print. So once again we have to add this particular welcome to 30 days of code, and then we have to run. So basically what we are trying to say is, so the console.log is used to print the output, and here you have to select Node.js. So any programming language this editor supports. So in this case, if you want to write the same code in Swift or anything, so all programming languages are given. So in our case, mostly we use JavaScript Node.js. So Node.js is completely, it's a a server built using JavaScript. Now how we have defined a sum function, they have defined n number of functions, built-in functions, and they have designed a server which will accept all the commands like what to do, etc. So Node.js is open sourcely built exclusively on JavaScript. It has many applications now, and this is a brief about HackerRank. But if you see, go forward for 30 days, every day one challenge it will unlock. So one day it will explain about data types. Now we have discussed about equal to, double equal to, triple equal to, right? So it will allow you to practice how to use some functions, etc. So how to handle in this case decimals. How do we, if we input this way, it gives you explanation. So you have to do sum of two numbers, and sum of two floating point numbers you have to display. Instead of 8, you have to display 8.0. So how do we display this as 8.0? And you'll have like simple use cases, and the output as well. If you are not able to get an output, you can always check output part as well. So here I think in editorial part they'll explain you in which are language how to do exactly, okay, to achieve. In this case JavaScript, this is how you can achieve it. So HackerRank allows you, and one more key part in using this particular editor is, it is, if you expand this, there is a three uh, icons over there. If you see three dots, if you expand this, how this editor also has some inbuilt code, okay. So the main function, how we have the function, so main function we write all the code snippet. So to work in order to work, it will have some structure. How the structure is, like process the SDN is, stdin is input, std out is output, okay. So they have, like, there is a variable they have defined called input. So this input, it will capture all the inputs, and the input they are using in as an array. So array is a concept in JavaScript where if you take, so arrays and objects are very important concepts in JavaScript, okay. We need to understand them, and then we have to do. So like any programming language, so array always we denote in JavaScript using square brackets. So if you use square brackets, that means it denotes arrays, and if you use curly braces, that means it denotes objects. Okay, this is a clear difference. So both have similar kind of functionality, but in case of objects and this one, the clear difference is, if you are using square brackets, it's an array. If you're using curly brackets, it's an object. Clear? And objects always come with key value pair. When I say key value pair, key colon and the value. In this case 1 2 3 etc. So this is how the structure of object looks, okay. Whereas for array, the structure would be like, you can define this way. If you define define 1 to 4, you can just define this way 124, and if you define one more, you can use a comma separator and you can put some other string. In this case, how you, in case of object, what we do is we say key 1 key 2 etc. This key 1 key 2 and then 123. You're getting it, right? So the difference between array and objects is, if you for object, if you're using the key itself, you can use the value, whereas for array we'll use index. So index in this case is, it starts with 0. So if you say what's the value in 0, so all I need to ask is, suppose if array I have defined var a equal to, then a of 0 will give me the output of 124. If I want to extract 123 value, all I say is index is first position 0 1. If it has 10 values, 0 1 2 3, last element will be 9. You're getting right, right?
Mm.
So a of 1 will be, if I want to extract 123 value, all I have to do is a of 1 I have to do, and this will give me 123 value. Okay. So if you, in case of objects, all I have to say is, how to say, what is the value of key one. So in this case, key one, get value of, or something in this way we'll do. Okay. Get value of key one. So in this case, what it will do is, it will get us the value as 124. So using IDs, if you want to extract information, objects is a place. Using index, if you want to extract information, then arrays is the go-to place. You're getting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So both will understand in UFI how we are doing. See, if we see, I'll just show you how the practical application. I'll come back to HackerRank again. So because this is important to understand. So this is our OData service. Okay. The basic OData service what we are trying to use. I think this has huge data. So I have taken one record. Okay. If you see, there's a curly brace to it, right? And if you see, there's a key and there's a value to it, right? So the whole OData service is rendered using objects, JavaScript objects. This they call it as JSON. Okay.
So in
So
keys, we'll always declare that with the code, always, right?
and not exactly. So you can define. See, you can generate these particular objects using in any way. Either you can create manually, or you can programmatically you can generate. Okay.
Mm.
Both ways are possible.
I
So
mean, in that,
ultimate.
so when we declare it, we can put like strings too, and then for numbers, we can just say 0, comma 1, comma 2 without any quotes, right? So similarly for the keys, do we have different ways to differentiate strings versus some
Okay.
variable?
Yeah, understood. So in this case, the program understand that if it start with the curly brace, so it understand that it expects always key value pair only. Okay. So that's how the objects are defined. So when you say objects, objects will come with always key value pairs. So they will not have single values. So these keys can be defined in any way. So but the syntax, like you said, it has to be in quotes. If it doesn't,
Mm.
you are not defining quotes. Again, it will end up with some error.
Mm. Got it.
So that is the default syntax of it. So they're like objects, and again JSON. There's some more difference is there. I'll just explain that. But like I said, these are not exactly pure objects. So within the objects, this uses object concept. Within objects, we call it something called JavaScript object notation. So this is something called, they call it as notation. So for all the OData, if you want to see the data, we use something called format equal to JSON. JSON
Mm.
is nothing but it's a JavaScript objects
Notation.
notation we are using. Okay, so I'll explain about JSON in detail, but to give a clear understanding about practical uses of that particular objects. So it allows
Mm.
us to hold all our live database data in terms of small chunks. If you see the whole data in the database, if you could have in lots of MB or anything, but in case of OData service, you can hold it in very kilobytes. See, it can be stringed into a single line, and the whole data, if you copy in a notepad, it will come to KBs. It will not hold any fraction. So texts are always low in size. So using this notation will, it will be very lightweight. All your application mobile, whenever you're using it, if they're so light, they can load very quickly. See, that's the power of holding in this particular approach advantages. So if you have to make a call, OData call every time for what, see, I want to fetch the customer details. You click a customer details, you go back, you wait for the database to give the output. Again, you show it. If you hold all the data, if you have the data ready in this simple lightweight fashion, so it will be very quickly delivered, right? You're able to relate.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So what we're trying to say is, so in order to instead of going back to database for every information, if we can hold most widely used data in lightweight form, it makes practically the performance, etc., in all the way in a higher mark. So for the cases, this particular objects, etc., will come into play. Okay.
Mm.
So I'm coming back again. So this is how the objects will be used, and arrays will be used for our mathematical calculation, etc. Say suppose you have row one, and row 2. So your like example we have seen, right? So row 1 you had some zero value, and row 2 you had minus 673. You can use an array to sum up all these values. You can push all these values into an array, and you can do a sum of all these values. Okay. So for in those cases arrays can be used, and particularly to fetch the data from database, etc., objects can be used. So these are just some random examples. There will be practically a number of ways we can use these particular areas. So why I'm explaining about this now? So if you see, go back to here example. So all the online editors, they use an approach called give them 100 inputs. Like first use case, I want to do sum of 1 and 2. Okay. In the second use case, I want to give sum of 2 and 3. Okay. And likewise, I can define 100 inputs at one shot. They call it as test case. This is test case 1. 1 and 2, sum of 1 and 2 I want output. Sum of 2 and 3 output I want. And likewise, I'll have 100 test cases. Okay. If I have 100 test cases, online editor can process all the 100 at one shot and give us values. So in this case, it will say value is 2 plus 1 is 3 and 2 plus 3 is 5. So it will give output this way. So 100 outputs it will give. You're getting it right? So 100 test cases, it will give 100 outputs. So this is how the online editors works. And why they do this way is, if your example you're faking it out. See, any online assessments, if you're faking it out, for the one output you can tweak it and you can assign it and you can resig and you can make it to display same output. But if you have given 100 inputs, your code has to work for all the 100 cases, right? So you cannot cheat the system. See, if I'm using an online editor to test your function is working or not, so you have defined your function, right? So some function you have written. Now in this case, what I'm saying is, if you have written a code using your online editor, what happens is this sum function will evaluate for 100 test cases or whatever test cases you key in. So this is how the functions are tested thoroughly by the online system editor, etc. So in this case, if I come here, so I'll give you one more example, probably you'll better understand. So this I think, I think again this has, I think. So I'll just run this code here. And it says, if you see here, they're like test case 1 of test case failed. So input is 12 and second line they're given as 4 and third line they have given as some other input. So this is input. Okay. And its system is checking for first test case. So first test case itself it failed. And if you want to test it on any custom test case also, we can enter some values this way. Okay. In this case, they gave some strings and tests. So this will run for this test case as well. So multiple test case if you give also, in this case, it says as successful. So for one input, it worked, but for the other input, it can fail. So to judge on all the test cases, what they do is they use multiple test cases and they'll try to test the code for all the test cases. So how the system works in this case, we are trying to understand, because this is very important for if you're attending any interviews, etc., using JavaScript. So here editor, it creates an array to store all the linear inputs. So in this case, we have two test case values. So like we were take an example of 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, right? So all this will be stored in this particular input array. User entered values as well as customer values will be stored in array. And to identify what is the index of the array, they use current line index as 0. So in this case, 0 states that index value is points to the first position, nothing but, or 1 and 2 value. So input current line will always point to the index of the array, and array will have all the test cases. Now in this case, we have defined two test cases. Both test cases will be in array, and using the index, we'll extract each of the input line. Now in this case, to process the data, what they are saying is they have given a function, and they're reading the from the console whatever input is there, they are extracting and they're placing into the assignment operator. So this is the plus equal to is nothing but input sdn equal to input sdn plus data. So input sdn is our input SDN equal to input SDN plus. So both are the same. So if I define the syntax this way, or if I define input underscore stdn plus equal to data, both mean the same. Okay, so here instead of simplification, what they do is they are concatenating it. So input stdn equal to input stdn plus data is nothing but input stdn plus equal to data. So this is how the short form of this one. Okay, what they do is concatenator operator they'll use and they'll represent it. So what are they saying? What are input is all available? All they are trying to read using this function. And slash n is that if there's any space, then they're separating it out. So read line is a function which will allow you to read from the array all the inputs. Okay, so when you're practicing multiple exercises, then you have to understand this particular notations. That's the reason I'm explaining this hacker rank how they use this particular. So they are using here array concept, and all your test cases they are feeding into array, and using read line function, they are trying to uh, read your array set of inputs, so you can directly consume here in this case of your main function. Okay,
So that read line function is a custom function they've written there, right?
correct. So this using this custom function, now they are see current line is nothing but 0. So in this case, whatever value in array index and index of 0, so if you see here index they made as 0, so index 0 will be passed to this. That means if you see this square brackets represents array, and array whatever index is 0, that value will be written. So in this case your output will be, if you're doing 4.0 hacker rank etc, so all this whatever input you are passing it, that will be used as an input for this particular function you are defining it. Same as our calculator application, where in our calculator application you're keying in 123, right?
Mm.
So the system what it does is this 123 value is stored in an array, and what is the position of it? In this case 0 is the position of array, so array of 0 contains 123 in our case, so that
Mm.
will be supplied to our function.
Mm.
So this is how the editors works, I'm trying to say. So this will be same concept of array will be used for all n number of input cases and to evaluate as well.
Mm.
So that's what I'm trying to say.
Mm.
So they use array concept to build a nice online editor which can test all your programs. So every program will be tested using this simple function of array concept. Clear?
Mm.
Maybe once you try it out one or two, you'll understand, and it will be useful, because straight away if you use, you'll not understand the jargons. You'll find it really tough to uh, how to use these functions. Basically all we have to do is here our script tag, think of this as a script tag and write your own function here. Whatever function you're writing, it will do the task. So always JavaScript, our focus will be on not on any line items, just our function. If you have a function word, then you have a name, that is, this is your function, main is your function. So all you have to do is what are your writing logic out of this. See, after the curly brace is opening and you're closing it, the moment it ends at 37, what are your logic you're intended, that has to be printed. Our
Mm.
goal is only focus area is only on the function, nothing more outside it. Outside it, least bothered we are.
Mm.
Okay, so always our focus should be on the function which we had intended to do the purpose, whether it is doing or not, we have to focus. So in this case, for some function, its purpose is to send us, sum of two numbers. If you define a calculate function, here the function goal of this function is to do the determined task. So whenever we call this function, it has to do its task, and it has to tell us what's the output of it. Okay,
So this get element by ID is like a common thing, right? That is common to the way how we use the script, right?
correct.
Or in this JavaScript. So is this also used in the UI5 side, SAP UI5 side? The
Yes, we use
same
it,
bucket.
but not in the same way. So
Oh,
why I'm explaining these concepts is none of the things which we have seen so far will not use it this way.
mm,
Frameworks will have all the more uh,
complicated. Yeah.
not complicated. They have designed a simple way.
Mm,
Now we understood like basic elements, right? What's the basic function?
got
Okay,
it.
let me show you how UI functions etc. We have it and we'll write. Okay, if you have the previous application, that also you can open, or I'll just so we have seen some list report application, right? So I think I'll create one application. I'll just show. We'll have an simple, login application as such. I think maybe I have placed it. Let's create one. Okay. So we'll create some simple UFF application. So we have seen the last time Hello World, right? You can open the same Hello World as well, or so how exactly we'll use in UFI, we'll try to say. So now UFI framework, what exactly SAP has done is it has used HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and all the JavaScript, primarily JavaScript, and it has designed controls. So when I say controls, now if you see in HTML, all so far we were seeing was button tag, correct? So in UFI, for the same button, we have 8 different types of buttons for serving different purpose. Okay. So using JavaScript, they designed reusable codes, lots of reusable codes. Plain HTML controls, maybe they could be, I'm not sure exactly, a rough figure of 100 controls you might have. In UFI, we have 850 controls. That means they have, see, every time if you, for the same button, to add cosmetic, etc., it will be really tough. So if you have so many lots of other buttons, flexibility, you can straight away consume in different ways. So it reduces your development effort as well. For each cases, like PDF now you want to display. So if you have a PDF plugin, so you need not to write all the code to display it in a PDF form, correct?
Mm.
So reusable codes they provided. So they have written all the standard logics, etc. And they say, boss, as a developer, if you wanted to render any PDF, use this particular plugin. It will allow you to, all you have to pass is the source of it, where the content of the data is there. You pass the content of it, then in your application, you can directly, display the PDF. So they'll give some reusable code snippets which can be as in the form of controls. So such controls all bundled together are 850 controls. Okay. So I think, okay. Okay. Change the workspace. Let me change the workspace. It is pointing to default location. All the plugins are installed outside. I think I get it somewhere. Okay. So it's fine. What I'll do is I'll just go to this example for now. You can go to ufi.sap.com and we'll have some demo apps here. So any UFI application, just randomly any application you can take. And in this case, if you see, they're like shopping cart, etc. So any application you can take. So I'm just taking shopping cart example. And the ufi.sap.com on the demo section, we'll have some sample applications are there. So in UFI, how exactly this JavaScript functions? So if you see here, so it has shopping cart kind of application where you can select on the left side, and it is displaying some content. So if you right click on it and click on inspect, so we can see the complete source code of it. So you have to go to source tab. So previously we have used elements to for HTML etc. item. Now we have used console to check the error logs. Now source to view the complete source code. So if you see here, it is the whole application folder structure is this is how the project. So we follow the MVC pattern. So model, view, controller, etc. And these are your view files. When I say view files, these are your HTML kind of thing. So how you have built HTML in UFI, we use XML. So using XML, we'll write the views. Okay, I'll explain how we do it. And similarly for the logic part, we use JavaScript itself. So if you see here, all these are your JavaScript files, the logic part. So one JavaScript file, typically JavaScript file, how it looks, just if you see here. So I'll say protected controller. And to read this particular thing, there's a small option over here on the bottom called pretty print. So you can click on that, then it will automatically. Okay. Not able to render. Let me take some other then. I think authorization they are restricted. It says 404. Okay. We'll do one thing. We can download this as well. Then locally we can check. So I think they restricted from maxing. So all you can just download this as well. So here the same code. So we can download and we can check, or we can straight away check from here as well. In this case, they have restricted accessing because SAP, publicly available. Maybe some restriction out there. View part we are able to see. So if you see the view part, so view pages are like each control. In this case, if you see, there's an page is a tag. Okay, this is how a XML tag. XML tags are nothing but for instead of HTML tags, we'll use SAP has created their own tags, right? So API we have seen SAP.m libraries, etc. So each tag, in this case, button is a tag, and it has what all properties you have. Now in this case, we have seen how to define button, you know value, etc. So in our case, the example, in order to define an HTML button, we were defining as button this way, and we are name of the button we are giving it as here. So this is your some press button, etc. The same thing, and in case of UFI, this is UFI button. So UFI button has lots of properties. So how do we define the text, etc. is, so if you see, button has something called field property called text. So this we call it as properties. ID is a property, enabled is a property, visible is a property. So and in our case, event is press event. So in this case, we had an event called on click, right? So in this case, we have used ID today, and we have given some add as an ID, and then we used on click as a event, correct? So for the on click, what we have done is we have defined sum as a function. So this is how we have defined an event, correct? If you see the syntax here, so the name of the button we have defined with all HTML tags will open with button and close with tag. So right. So for the name of it, we defined it in between, and for the function event, we called on click, and we have defined some. So this is a HTML event. Okay. What SAP does is SAP creates their own controls. In this, we call it as custom UFI controls. Custom UFI controls. So custom UFI controls are nothing but they look like HTML tags. And if you give for the HTML tag, it's like standard keywords. Like any programming language, it has standard keywords, right? We cannot reuse the same names for any other places. So HTML keywords are paragraph, etc. are HTML keywords, correct? Right. So if I can define my own tag, so the same paragraph tag, always if it has to start with this particular font, etc., then I can define my own tag, right? So XML is such a language which gives you flexibility to define your own tags. So I'm repeating again. So HTML, we have standard tags like paragraph tag, etc. So if I can give a custom name, so instead of P, I can call it as more readable as paragraph. Okay. So what I'm saying is this will XML gives us a flexibility. So you can give any custom name, and you can refer this to any of your parent programming language. So we can design such a custom tags. So these custom tags are nothing but, so HTML has standard tags, XML has custom tags. So if you're defining in such a way, then those are called as XML tags. Clear? So this also starts and ends with opening tag and closing tag. Only difference is instead of HTML tags, we'll use custom tags. So those custom tags, in our case, SAP has built so many custom tags it has built, and it is calling as 850 controls as SAP UFI framework.
Do we need to know the XML, like skills as well?
Not required.
For the
In the it's only the terminology is XML. We'll not use any XML.
Okay.
So now how you remembered like paragraph is meant for this, title for title H1. So like this, like 850 controls, we refer SAP UFA framework. What I'm saying is SAP has used XML language to build such a custom tags.
Hmm. Do they
Okay.
have any library that refers to like what they are referring to?
Yes,
Um,
yes, correct. So that we have seen already previously. That's what is the API. So
API.
API has all these libraries. So
Now I'm able to
as
connect everything.
so what we are saying is all these controls which SAP has shipped. Now, if you see the button tag, now we had in HTML, if you see, we had only plain button. It has very basic limitation, like not limitations. It has only it serves a basic purpose. But
Hmm.
now SAP, what framework offers you is this is what framework offers. You have on tap what it has to do, on press what it has to do. These are your events. It
Hmm.
gives you meaningful names instead of on click. See,
Click,
those are
yeah.
like random names, etc. You have to remember, etc. So it
Right.
says for all the functions, it says press event only. So it is easy to for you to understand that click means press. So it gives your own custom names. So
Hmm.
frameworks, what they do is they redefine the names and they can give a collection of tools or controls. So same button here, you have 10 flavors of buttons. Based on scenario, you can use your own way. And these are the events which you are, click events, etc. we are referring to. And the properties which I'm saying, so these are the properties. So it has lots of properties. In case of plain button, you have only one property called ID or click. That's it. Here you
Hmm.
can put a button to icon if you want put. You have a they're giving us the properties, and icon has to come first. Text. See what's the text name of the button you have to give. You use the property called text instead of placing it. In this syntax. So in this case, you have to place in this between this particular closing in tags, right? So here in SAP, the same tag how we are doing is. mm, so if we say button, so the same way we are giving it, but to define it, we'll say text equal to, in this case, I'll say hello. Button name is hello. Okay. If you assume it, this is how the difference will be between your HTML tags and your XML tags. So in this case, this is how you are defined. So what I'm trying to say is all this API, whatever we are referring to in the property section are nothing but these properties. So if you say enabled equal to true, this what will be enabled or it will be disabled. So these are we call it as properties, and the click events, the so-called on click, etc. we call it as events. Okay. So in this case, presses or event, and events will always have a function to it. Okay. So we give a function to it. So this function is written in JavaScript. Clear?
Hmm.
Now you're able to understand how
Mhm.
we the JavaScript the one and how in the framework will be used.
Hmm.
Okay.
Like
Now
modularization and using those modularization event as opposed to like writing things from the scratch. It's always like referring to a function or a class.
correct. So they made it more organized. So frameworks give the flexibility to make our development pretty much easy and smooth. So always when you have to look for any property, uh, you have to look it at the API reference. So for the, if you in this case it's a button. So there's some other button called segment button. So there are different flavors of button like I was saying, right? So it could have different properties altogether. Okay. So I can use it selected key. So I'll show you how this looks first. Same place. Now you have to refer to this, you have to remember one more thing. So we have for demo apps, you can check out demo apps, and API reference samples are the place where we'll frequently use. So all
Mm.
the controls you here, if you want to check for any control, so segment button, how it looks, what all properties I can use. So you can click on this and pretty much it will show you. So this is what a segment button does. So it gives you a tab structure, or you can give a name, you can give an icon, and you can say kids, etc. So 1 2 3. So here in this case, on each click item, so selected key, so which is a selected key. So in this case it has a properties called selected key, etc. Right. So whereas a plain button, it may not have selected key, etc. because it is always a single button. Getting it right?
Mm.
So if you see, if you I can take a radio button or any button, and so in this case button. So even within the button, how many times you can use? So if it's success, you can use a green color, or if you default without any border, etc. default one. Even this icon is in a button, so you can use an edit icon, and these are like various use cases. See, some highlighted button in the blue color. So these all are like achieved using some property called type. So if you use button type, so it will button type as the accept, then it will become this way. So in the API, if you see, if you go back to button example, so here you have enabled etc, right? So similarly type is set. So if you set the type to, you click on this, it will further show you the accept will give you this particular kind of green color button, okay, for success case etc. And similarly back button will give you this back arrow. Now you're able to see, right, some places we have seen, so this back button, so these are back button. So you'll have, I mean, these kind of different buttons etc will be used in using properties we can achieve it, right? So I think tomorrow we'll just see one simple example. I'll just try to show you one simple example in using UFI, then we'll try to understand more about it. Okay,
Oh,
I think, any questions so far?
no, I think I'm good.
So here we are all we are trying to see is so far I'll start fresh tomorrow, because tomorrow onwards we'll see more on UFA, and you can probably practice some basic functions like some similarly you can try multiple function, divide function. So both are pretty much the same. All you need to use two values and you can just extend to it, right?
Yeah, I can see that, when we are coming to the SAP UFI side, we may not have properties to change color and everything, right? Because some things have to be adhering to the theme, right? That they have preset. So yeah, I could see some properties like color and backgrounds are not to be found there. So
Yeah, so
I mean,
in
relate to it
UI,
because of that HTML introduction that you gave.
yeah, so here actually UFA has different concept. So here we they recommend not to use CSS, because the way they are to, in order to handle CSS, they are using some other tool called theme designer tool. So I'll tell you the reason behind it as well.
Mm.
So primary reason is, see, SAP doesn't want to see you have customers across the globe, right? Some if you take a Reliance customer, he uses blue color. If you take an Aditya Birla Group, he uses some red color, right? So
Mm.
if you customize and if always you give SAP flavor as blue and to all the applications, a problem is within the code you are restricting yourself to one color. But
Mm.
SAP, what it want to do is, it wants to remove the color part. It wanted to give
Mm.
you the plain, the calculator example how we have seen. It wanted to remove the CSS part. It wants to give you, or to add your own color. For that, it has given a tool. Okay, it has thousands of CSS classes. All you have to do is select which color you want. That's it.
Got it.
So they are parking the CSS separate. Here they are only focusing on the XML and JavaScript part. So CSS is completely removed from framework. So for that they have given a tool. So what they're saying is, so we'll focus only on, not on the look part, we'll concentrate only on the logic part. So we'll build the use case solution, and developers should focus on building solution, not on the color part. And for
Mm.
doing that color part, we'll use a separate tool. Using a few clicks, you can achieve whatever desired color you want. Okay.
Right.
So we'll see at that approach. So here our focus is on SAP, always its focus will be on building business applications, and
Mm.
it provides the tools as well. So we'll see in tomorrow's session like how exactly basic UFI application we'll see, and how this HTML, CSS, JavaScript are used in this particular scenario. Also, we'll try to understand.
Sure.
Yeah. Fine. You think you can practice any bill part example or any JavaScript simple function you can write, and you can try to
Yes.
write out
Yes.
meanwhile, so we can understand how to write the functions in UFI as well. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah. Thanks.